In the heart of Arizona, nestled deep within the dry, desolate land, lay a canyon that locals had long avoided. Known as the Whispering Gorge, this canyon was shrouded in mystery and fear. It was said to be cursed, haunted by the vengeful spirits of Native Americans who once lived there, long before the land was taken from them. The tribe had been peaceful, living in harmony with the land. But when settlers arrived, they forced the tribe off their sacred land, leaving behind a legacy of bloodshed and betrayal. The spirits of the tribe, filled with anger and sorrow, were said to still roam the canyon, seeking revenge on anyone who dared to enter. The air around the canyon was thick with unease, and even the bravest souls who ventured too close would feel an inexplicable sense of dread. The locals knew better than to challenge the ancient curse, for they had heard the stories passed down through generations. Stories of those who had entered the canyon and never returned. Some spoke of strange happenings, objects moving on their own, eerie whispers on the wind, and shadows that seemed to follow those who dared to come near. It was a place where the living and the dead seemed to blur, a place where the spirits of the past still held power over the present. The canyon itself was a place of natural beauty, with towering rock formations and narrow, winding paths that seemed to go on forever. But beneath its breathtaking exterior, something far more sinister lurked. The deeper one ventured into the gorge, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew colder, and the sunlight seemed to fade, as if the canyon itself absorbed the warmth of the day. The deeper you went, the darker it became. And soon, even the bravest adventurers began to feel a sense of isolation, as if the canyon was closing in around them. Some claimed to hear strange sounds in the distance, whispers carried on the wind, voices that spoke in a language no one could understand. Others said they had seen figures moving among the rocks, shadows that flickered just out of sight, always just beyond reach. It was as if the canyon itself was alive, breathing, watching, waiting. The locals, who had lived in the area for generations, spoke in hushed tones about the canyon's cursed history. They said that anyone who entered the canyon without respect for the spirits would never return. The whispers, they said, were the voices of the tribe, still angry and vengeful, calling out to anyone who would listen. It was a warning, a reminder that the spirits of the past still held sway over the land. One day, a group of hikers, eager for adventure, arrived in Arizona, unaware of the dark history that lay hidden in the Whispering Gorge. They were young, filled with excitement and curiosity, and the canyon seemed like the perfect place to explore. They had heard rumors of the canyon's eerie reputation, but they dismissed them as mere superstition, the stuff of local legends meant to scare off outsiders. They were confident in their abilities, prepared for whatever the canyon might throw their way. Armed with backpacks full of supplies and cameras ready to capture every moment, they set off toward the canyon, eager to experience its beauty firsthand. The locals warned them, of course, urging them to stay away from the gorge. But the hikers laughed it off, believing that the stories were nothing more than tall tales. They were determined to prove that the curse was nothing but a myth. With every step they took, they ventured further into the canyon, oblivious to the danger that awaited them. The air grew heavier, and the landscape seemed to shift, as if the canyon itself was alive, watching their every move. But they pressed on, unaware that they were walking straight into the heart of the curse. As the hikers descended deeper into the canyon, the atmosphere began to change. The sunlight, once bright and warm, seemed to fade, replaced by a strange, unnatural twilight. The temperature dropped, and the wind picked up, carrying with it faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. At first, the hikers dismissed it as the wind rustling through the trees, but as they continued on, the whispers grew louder, more distinct, as if someone, or something, was speaking directly to them. They paused, uneasy, but convinced that it was just the wind playing tricks on them. The canyon, after all, was a vast and mysterious place, and it was easy to let your imagination run wild in such a setting. But the whispers persisted, growing louder with each step they took. They began to feel as though they were being watched, as if unseen eyes were following their every movement. The hairs on the back of their necks stood up, and a sense of dread settled over them. They tried to shake off the feeling, but it was impossible to ignore. The canyon seemed to be closing in around them, its walls growing steeper and more oppressive with every passing moment. It was as though the very land itself was warning them to turn back. Nightfall came swiftly, and the hikers set up camp at the base of the canyon. The sky, once clear and blue, had turned a deep shade of purple, and the stars seemed distant and cold. The fire they built crackled and popped, its warmth providing a small comfort in the growing chill. But the darkness around them felt different, more oppressive, as if the night itself was alive. As they sat around the campfire, one of the hikers, a young man named Jake, noticed something strange in the distance. There, just beyond the reach of the firelight, stood a figure. It was tall and cloaked in shadows, its features obscured by a hooded cloak that seemed to blend into the darkness. Jake squinted, trying to make out the details, but the figure was gone in an instant, vanishing into the night, as if it had never been there. He blinked, unsure if he had imagined it. But the sense of unease that settled over him was undeniable. He tried to brush it off, but the sight of the figure lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. He turned to his friends, eager to share what he had seen. But when he spoke, his voice trembled with fear. The others laughed nervously, dismissing it as a trick of the light or his imagination. But deep down, they all felt it. A growing sense of fear that none of them could shake. The canyon was alive with something they couldn't understand, and it was beginning to make its presence known. As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew heavier. The fire flickered and danced, casting long, twisted shadows on the canyon walls. The whispers, which had once been faint and distant, now seemed to be all around them. The voices were no longer just a faint rustling in the wind. They were clear and distinct, calling out in a language none of them could understand. The hikers sat in silence, their hearts pounding in their chests as the temperature dropped even further. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying with it an eerie, mournful wail. It was as if the spirits of the canyon were crying out, warning them to leave before it was too late. But it was already too late. The air grew thick with an oppressive energy, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble with every passing moment. The whispers turned into low growls, and the shadows around them seemed to shift and move on their own. The hikers were no longer sure if they were still in control of their surroundings. It felt as though the canyon itself was alive, its very walls pulsing with an ancient, malevolent force. They could feel the spirits closing in around them, their presence suffocating. The whispers were no longer just voices, they were commands, urging the hikers to leave, to turn back before it was too late. But there was nowhere to run. The canyon had them trapped. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently, knocking the hikers off their feet. The fire sputtered and went out, plunging them into darkness. The canyon seemed to come alive, its walls groaning and shifting as though something was awakening, deep within the earth. The whispers turned into frantic, angry voices, their words unintelligible but filled with an unmistakable sense of rage. The hikers scrambled to their feet, panic setting in as they tried to make sense of what was happening. The very earth beneath them seemed to be shifting, as if the canyon was alive, breathing, moving with a will of its own. One of the hikers, a woman named Sarah, screamed as she was suddenly pulled into the darkness. Her friends rushed to her, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air, swallowed by the canyon itself. Her screams echoed through the gorge, but they grew fainter and fainter, until they were nothing more than a distant memory. The hikers were paralyzed with fear, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The whispers grew louder, now a chorus of voices, each one calling out in anger and sorrow. The canyon had claimed one of them, and it was clear that it would not stop until it had claimed them all. The remaining hikers, now terrified beyond reason, began to run, desperate to escape the canyon's grip. But no matter which direction they took, they found themselves deeper and deeper within the gorge. The canyon seemed to stretch on endlessly, its winding paths twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. Every path they tried led them further into the heart of the curse. The shadows grew darker, more oppressive, and the whispers followed them, growing louder with every step. It was as if the canyon was alive, guiding them toward an inescapable fate. The air grew colder, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The spirits were closing in, their presence suffocating, their anger palpable. The hikers realized too, late, that they had made a grave mistake by entering the canyon. It was no longer just a place of natural beauty. It was a prison, a tomb for anyone who dared to trespass. The canyon was alive with the spirits of the past, and they were not about to let anyone leave. One by one, the hikers began to disappear. The first to go was a man named Ben, who was pulled into the darkness by unseen hands. His screams echoed through the canyon, but they were quickly swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed. The others tried to find him, calling out his name, but there was no sign of him. The canyon had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many before him. The remaining hikers, now reduced to a small, terrified group, continued to run, but they were no longer sure where they were going. The canyon had become a maze, its paths shifting and changing with every step. The whispers had turned into growls, and the shadows that followed them were no longer just figments of their imagination. They were real, and they were closing in. The hikers could feel the spirits surrounding them, their presence suffocating. It was clear now that there was no escape. The canyon had them trapped, and it would not let them go. Jake, the last remaining hiker, stumbled through the darkness, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the whispers behind him, growing louder with every step. He knew the spirits were closing in, and there was nowhere left to run. He turned a corner, desperate for any sign of safety, but what he saw stopped him dead in his tracks. There, standing before him, was the figure he had seen earlier, the hooded figure that had haunted his thoughts since the moment he had first laid eyes on it. It was tall, its features hidden in shadow, but Jake could feel its eyes upon him. The whispers had turned into a chant, a rhythmic, hypnotic sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The figure raised its hand, and Jake felt a chill run through his body. The ground beneath him trembled, and he could hear the voices of the spirits calling out to him, urging him to join them. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The figure stepped closer, and Jake realized with a sinking heart that he had reached the end. The canyon had claimed him, just as it had claimed all those before him. The spirits of the past had come for him, and there was no escaping their wrath. As the darkness closed in around him, Jake understood the truth. The canyon was cursed, and no one who entered would ever leave.